After 6 years of marriage, a doctor discovered that she was still a virgin. A loveless marriage is like a prison. Her husband's indifference and her mother-in-law's harshness. These figures who suddenly intruded into her life were enough to shatter in an instant any girl who had grown up carefree and surrounded by love. At 18, a young girl named Effie happily married a famous art critic called Ruskin under her parents' arrangement. At that time Ruskin was already 30 years old, and in the grand city of Paris the Ruskin family were all respectable members of high society. Because of this, Effie and her middle-class family cherished this hard-won marriage deeply. On the very first day of becoming Mrs. Ruskin, Effie bid farewell to her parents and to her beloved younger sister. The newlywed husband solemnly promised his in-laws that he would treat his wife well. However, once they boarded the train bound for Paris, Ruskin seemed to become a completely different man. Facing his wife's radiant, shining eyes, he sat coldly across from her without a trace of warmth. The bustling and glamorous streets of Paris filled Effie, who had never traveled far from home, with amazement and curiosity. She did not understand what marriage truly meant, and her heart was set only on how to become a proper and worthy wife. Before long, their carriage stopped in front of a manor on the outskirts of the city, yet the only person who came out to greet them was a young housekeeper. After they entered, Ruskin's mother warmly welcomed her son whom she had not seen for half a year. She did not even spare a glance at her newly arrived daughter-in-law before pulling her newlywed son upstairs. At dinner, Ruskin's mother immediately laid down strict rules for Effie. She warned Effie not to disturb Ruskin's work, to uphold the family's reputation at all times, and to obey the family's code of conduct. When Ruskin choked on his wine, Effie tried to stand up to help her husband, but she was sternly stopped by her mother-in-law. She claimed that a girl from the countryside lacked the basic sense to handle unexpected situations. At that moment, Effie felt clearly that her mother-in-law harbored deep disdain for her background. Yet on their very first wedding night, Effie carefully followed her mother's teachings. After washing and preparing herself, she shyly removed her clothes in front of her husband, waiting for the sacred moment when she would transform from a girl into a woman. But Ruskin did not say a single word, and with chilling indifference he walked out of the bedroom. That night, Ruskin hid in his study and never showed himself. This refusal to consummate the marriage without any explanation turned what seemed like a glamorous union into the beginning of Effie's nightmare. Early the next morning, Effie forced herself to remain calm and went downstairs with a bright smile on her face. But the servants told her that Ruskin had already left for work. In this unfamiliar environment, Effie had no idea how to adapt. She hoped she could blend in as quickly as possible, but when she suggested trimming the garden branches together with her mother-in-law, her offer was flatly rejected. Effie stood there awkwardly, not daring to say another word. At noon, when Ruskin returned home, he shut himself away in his study, and no one was allowed to approach him. Yet whenever an event required him to appear with his family, he would bring Effie along and show off his wife's youth and beauty in front of everyone. But the moment they returned home, he would disappear from Effie's sight. At first, Effie kept searching for answers. She deliberately tore one of Ruskin's shirts and refused the servant's help, trying to present herself as a virtuous wife in order to win her mother-in-law's approval. Instead, her mother-in-law mocked her, saying that doing such needlework would only make her look like a cheap maid. No matter what Effie said or did, she was met with criticism from her mother-in-law. This kind of life lasted for half a year, and Effie began to notice that her hair was falling out in clumps, and she suffered from sleepless nights again and again. Yet she was not even 19 years old. These symptoms, which should never have appeared at her age, left her looking drained and dispirited. She had no choice but to rely on sleeping pills. But even Effie's decision to avoid disturbing anyone and lie unconscious in bed triggered her mother-in-law's displeasure. Her mother-in-law showed no awareness of Effie's decline, accusing her of staying in bed at noon and lacking proper upbringing. Effie forced herself to gather her strength, changed her clothes, and went into the drawing room. Ruskin's aunt noticed that Effie's face was pale, her eye sockets sunken, and her body had grown noticeably thinner. She helped Effie back to the bedroom and gently asked whether she might be pregnant. Hearing this almost absurd word, Effie responded helplessly and brushed off her aunt's concern. She understood that her husband's reputation and dignity mattered more than anything else. She could not tell anyone about the hardship she was enduring, the helpless feeling of having pain she could not voice pressed against her chest like a massive stone. A year later, because of work, Ruskin brought Effie to live in Venice. Venice was bathed in sunlight, the air was moist, and the canals reflected the colors of the sky. Without her mother-in-law's constant hostility, Effie felt as if she could finally breathe a hint of freedom. When they first arrived in Venice, Ruskin would take her on boat rides and sit beside her, telling her ancient legends. Then they visited famous local landmarks, and Effie listened carefully to her husband's explanations. For the first time, she felt a trace of tenderness from him. Occasionally, Ruskin would also take her to meet his friends, but this brief happiness lasted only a few days. Soon, Ruskin once again threw himself entirely into his work, returning to the apartment late every night with exhaustion written all over him. Effie was left alone in the empty rooms. She did not speak Italian, and she was unfamiliar with Venice's transportation. Too afraid to go out alone, she felt like a bird trapped inside a cage. When the suffocating loneliness overwhelmed her and she tried to say a few words to her husband, Ruskin dismissed her with only a couple of perfunctory replies. That day, Effie finally gathered the courage to step out of the apartment, hoping to get a breath of fresh air. Unexpectedly, on the street she ran into her husband's student, John. John was the very first person she met on her first day in Venice. Introduced to her by Ruskin, John took the initiative to offer to accompany Effie and help her become familiar with the streets of Venice. As time went on, they met more and more frequently. John sensed Effie's sorrow, and gradually their lives began to intertwine in many ways. Just as John tried to confess his feelings, Effie felt frightened by her status as a married woman. She did not want to brand herself as immoral, yet when she curled up alone on the bed and reached up to feel the light, she felt like a puppet, placed in darkness with no visible end. She fell gravely ill and lay unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. Ruskin summoned a doctor to treat her, but even the doctor felt powerless. Fortunately, a few days later, Effie slowly regained consciousness, but by then her heart felt hollowed out. She sat by the window all day, the rain sliding down the glass as if caressing her pale face, making her appear even more desolate. She seemed unable to sense her husband's presence at all, and she began to suffer frequent headaches and difficulty breathing. When the doctor visited again, she was finally diagnosed with neurasthenia. The doctor told Ruskin that Effie needed large doses of medicine and far more outdoor activity to ease her condition. After hearing about Effie's health from a friend, John deliberately arranged a sketching excursion and suggested that Ruskin bring Effie along. On the day they headed to the small island. After arriving by boat, Ruskin focused solely on himself and paid no attention to his wife at the stern. Without the slightest trace of gentlemanly manners, he left his wife behind and stepped ashore alone without looking back. John, however, carefully helped Effie off the boat and kept a constant watch over her every move. This stark and ironic contrast sent an even deeper chill through Effie's heart. On this small island, they planned to stay for a week. When Effie read the letters her parents had written to her, John urged her to return home to see her family and even spoke on her behalf in front of Ruskin. He hoped Ruskin would take time to accompany Effie to visit her parents, but for several days in a row, Ruskin did not utter a single word of concern for his wife. That day, Effie went alone for a walk by the river. Unexpectedly, she saw John swimming naked in the river, and her heart began to race as her cheeks flushed red. That night, the atmosphere in the room was subtle and charged. Effie no longer pushed John away, and John handed her a portrait he had secretly drawn of her. John could feel the loneliness buried deep inside Effie. On the 4th day on the island, Ruskin received urgent work and was eager to leave. He left his wife behind and climbed into a carriage alone, and in that very moment Effie's heart died completely. Those days on the island were the most relaxed she had felt since her marriage. John understood Effie's illness, and he constantly tried to find meaningful things for her to do, keeping her company, talking with her, and watching the sunrise and sunset together. After the sketching trip on the Venetian island ended, Ruskin took Effie back to Paris. Effie's younger sister had already arrived at Ruskin's home, having come to Paris to stay for a while and keep her sister company. After returning from Venice, Effie became much more composed. She was no longer afraid of her mother-in-law, and when Ruskin and his mother attacked her with words at the same time, she would lift her chin high and answer back. Despite her mother-in-law's endless nagging, Effie still called for a carriage and left, intending to take her sister out to explore Paris on her own. In the carriage, her sister clearly sensed that Effie seemed like a different person. Her smile was gone, and so was the joy she once carried. Effie went to a law firm to inquire about divorce. At that time, there were almost no precedents of women seeking to dissolve a marriage. The lawyer made it clear that even if the husband was at fault, as long as he did not file for divorce, the wife had no right to initiate the dissolution herself. Such days dragged on for more than 2 additional years. Effie approached numerous institutions and sought out countless lawyers, yet not a single one was willing to take her divorce case. Her hair continued to fall out, and a patch at the back of her head could no longer be concealed. Her sister hoped her brother-in-law would show more concern, but Ruskin slandered his wife instead. He claimed that her own improper behavior, including allegedly flirting with his student in Venice, had led to her current condition, and that her depression was merely the result of guilt and a form of atonement. Ruskin attempted to mislead Effie's family through her sister, insisting that he bore no fault in the marriage. When Effie received a letter from her mother accusing her of disgraceful conduct in her husband's household, she refused to remain silent any longer. She immediately packed her belongings and prepared to leave Ruskin's home. Before departing, she pleaded with Ruskin to release her and sign the divorce papers as soon as possible. Ruskin gave no reply, and just like on their wedding night, he turned away with cold indifference. A year later, a lawyer arrived at Ruskin's parents' home with a medical examination report and Effie's divorce petition. The lawyer stated that although Effie and Ruskin had been married for more than 5 years, the medical report confirmed that she was still a virgin. Even then, Ruskin attempted to blame Effie, claiming that everything was her fault and that he had no intention of divorcing. The lawyer appeared deeply helpless. The divorce case of the artist Ruskin remained deadlocked, causing a significant stir throughout Paris. Far away in Venice, John heard the news, and he moved from Venice to Paris, renting a studio in a working-class district. Yet he did not meet with Effie, because at that moment, every move Effie made was under public scrutiny. He could not allow unfounded rumors to destroy the freedom she had fought for over 2 long years. One day, Effie's sister went to see John. She told him that she and her sister were about to leave forever. She explained that the divorce case had been entrusted to the kind lawyer, and Effie could not come to say goodbye in person. She wanted to thank John for giving her courage and the strength to rediscover herself. John's presence had allowed Effie to experience what it felt like to be loved, and it became the driving force that helped her face the life ahead with clarity. John stood by the window and locked eyes with Effie for a long time. Sitting in the carriage, Effie still did not know what her future would hold as a married woman, but at least she had chosen a direction for herself. Her lawsuit was not only a battle for her personal freedom. In an era when women's rights were severely restricted, she used legal means to challenge the unreasonable institution of marriage itself. No matter the outcome, she became a pioneer of female strength and awakening. The characters in the film were all based on real historical figures. Ruskin and Effie maintained a marriage in name only for 6 years, and the final judgment remains unknown to later generations.